All right. So we're just going to do a quick session with Paddy and Jonathan. They're going to talk about the crude market. So I guess to start off with, Jonathan, Paddy, if you can just kind of give some quick high-level bullet points on how you see the market and how you see your role being Euronav and Tanker International within that market.
Okay. I think the big thing that I think we see in TI is the industrialization of our sector. TI has been going 18 years. In 18 years, we've only had 40 different clients. If we look at that, or if you compare that to a product market, it would be completely different. Now, if we look at our basic business model, we probably have 10 to 12 clients that we're doing business with on a very regular basis. Our clients are looking for scale, they're looking for size, in order to do complete renewed business. So I look at our business and say it's absolutely, we're being industrialized. Our clients are getting smaller in number, but larger in scale. And for what they're looking from their service provider, because undoubtedly, obviously, in running a shipping entity, we are service suppliers, we must, in many respects, mirror what our clients are doing. The second big thing, obviously, from what we see is the age issue. Age for us in tankers, whether it's correct or incorrect, age is becoming a really big issue. This 15-year question, which we see very much being brought through from China, and obviously with the VLCCs are undoubtedly a Chinese story. It has become an issue. Is it going to go away? From what we see and from what we hear, no. So industrialization of our model and age is the big things that I would talk about.
And I think it's fair to say that it's been monumentally commoditized as a business, hasn't it? I mean, in the sense that the moment that summed it up the best to me was when I was talking to an executive from an oil company, and we were in a competitive process. And the comment from him was, "You're all good. Now be the cheapest." So the reason that we're all good is that we do have to hand it to OCIMF and the SIRE process that in those 18 years that Jonathan's talked about, shipping has changed out of all recognition on board a tanker. I think that 20 years ago, you could have gone on board a tanker and seen cement boxes over pipes on deck. There's no question that that doesn't exist in the international shipping business today. That you will go on board and that all the crews are in uniforms. I mean, certainly at Euronav they are, and I guess they are in nearly every ship that I've come across. So the fact that every time you go to a port, you're inspected by the customer has changed behaviour, and you can see it in the number of oil spills from tankers. This is one of the most remarkable graphs if you ever go onto Intertanker or ITOP's website and have a look at oil spills. And this is a thing of the past. Every shipping company now will tell you, we occasionally have a spill to deck. The idea that you put oil in the water is anathema. So this industry has now become commoditized. It's not a question of, I have to work with so-and-so. I've always got on well with him. I've had 4 ships on time charter from him. He's got a quality operation. Simple fact is, I think we've all got quality operations. The only bit that's a little bit different maybe is on your own asset maintenance. But
I think it's very much the right point. I mean, if you looked 20-odd years ago, you were talking about VTOL or the traders. Many, many years ago, there was a whole myriad of different acceptabilities, different ownership, from the sort of Rolls-Royce to the let's say, the person at the bottom of the pile. And then the traders would look at it, and you'd always be able to get a cheaper rate from him to do this, that, and whatever. In many respects, and for very good reasons, shipping has upped its game tremendously. But when we look at the traders in particular, now they cannot be seen, from what we see, as being taken substandard ships. That for them, it's a big risk that they're taking. So I think in many respects, we've upped our game for very, very good reasons. But we run a commodity, and it's called freight. And TI, we call it days for sale.
And I think that, there are a couple of things that spring to my mind about that. One is that, of course, Vitol are a good example because they trade so much oil. But the amount that they make on the average trade is very, very slight. So, and they work very hard to make their fortunes. But the one thing that they couldn't do is to say, let's take a cheaper ship for the sake of $100,000, $200,000, and then find the ship wasn't acceptable to somebody they were trying to on-sell a cargo to. This would be a complete disaster, or that it couldn't call at a certain port. So, I mean, you know, for them, funnily enough, although they are the least concerned from an optical or, if you like, professional ethical standard as to the quality of a ship, because they're more focused on the money, they've been driven through their trading and their reselling to actually being some of the strictest people you'll meet. One of the other things I think is really important to talk about has been the change whilst in those 18 years in credit and the structure of working capital in a voyage. Because when we formed the TI pool in 2000, we had a credit line from Nordea Bank for working capital. It was $10 million, and we never drew it down. We drew it down for 1 or 2 voyages. But here we are 18 years later. We're entering a phase where China becomes more important to us, and we're often doing, what, 4 voyages a year, John?
Wow.
So 4 voyages for a year for a VLCC, maybe 5. Throughout that period, all the bunker cost that you burn is on your working capital balance. So all of a sudden, you're getting paid after discharge. You're working a quarter of the year, and you're burning 75 tons a day. So credit became a big story, and of course you'll be familiar with the story because some credit access for pools to give some working capital relief to ship owners was the biggest trick, the biggest development. And I think that we're doing it now at the TI pool. It took a bit of resistance. Owners didn't like the idea initially, but they've got there in the end. And of course, the guys who taught us to get on with this, because it makes a difference, were Navigate, because they instigated these credit lines for owners, and blimey, it went like hotcakes. It attracted a lot of customers.
And I think it's an extremely important point, because if you look at our best VLCCs, our lowest consuming, the fundamental question that you must ask yourself is, do you trade for cash flow or do you trade for TCE? So it's an extremely important point. Obviously, in difficult periods of the market now, there's a lot of owners who are trading for cash flow. But in my opinion, it's a recipe for disaster. When we look at our ships going out of China, our lowest consuming ships, they're going to the Caribs, they're going to the US Gulf. It's a 130-day round voyage for that ship.
So you're seeing a bifurcated market then, that some people would go AG East because they can't stand the cash flow of going AG West.
Correct. But that also brings into another subject, is that we are making decisions when we come out of China and bunkering our ships in Singapore, and then you look to the AG and the results in the AG are, let's just say, 10, 12, 13. Out of West Africa, they're 14, 15. Out of the Caribs, US Gulf, they're 18 to 19. So a substantive difference if you can take the arrangement of only getting paid after 130 days. But the TCE uplift is massive. However, there's another question here, is that you've then got to have access to the cargoes in the US Gulf. So the owners may look at it and say they don't like the cash flow, or they may think they can stick with the cash flow issue. But then you've got to have access to the cargoes. And that's the other side of the equation. And that comes back to scale and size. Because in effect, at TI, what are we offering? We're offering consistency of access to ships, consistency of access to quality ships. To some extent, the whole market is full of relatively good quality ships, but we offer consistency of access.
And Jonathan, what are the Generate VLCCs, and all of them, because INSW's in the pool as well, what is that going to do for Tankers International?
Well, obviously overnight we go to 65 vessels. I think that the thing for us is that our clients have been saying for a number of months, years now, is that they want this consistency of access. They want, to some extent, I've got to be careful how I say it, can we change the markets? Probably not. But at the end of the day, our clients want access to ships, access to consistent quality, and when we have issues, we're going to sort the issues out. So they want to have, to some extent, do they want to do lots of business with lots of different owners, or lots of business with a fewer number of owners? Because at the end of the day, we're so tied into this relationship, we're not really going to have issues. We're going to sort issues out.
So you have that cash flow issue, and I just always think about that. You know, in insurance companies, it was always the sign insurance company was going to go bankrupt when they started writing premium for cash flow, because they start to ignore risk in order to get the cash in, and so they start to get their minds a little bit twisted in terms of working out where the value proposition is. So the stress that the cash flow is seen in the ship owner as this huge stress, but on the other side, it's a huge stress for the big customers. And let's be clear, the big customers today are not Exxon and Shell. The IOCs were the big customers of 15 years ago. The big customers today are the NOCs. And they're running, their cash flow issue is how much oil is at the refinery. And that's why reliability becomes critical to them.
And that's another issue, is that about positioning of our vessels. Obviously, with the reduction in imports into the US from the Middle East, naturally you're not having many ships coming into the US Gulf. So actually, with this tremendous increase in exports out of the US Gulf, lesser so out of the Caribs now, you know, how are those ships actually going to arrive into the US Gulf to be able to take this increase in oil? Actually, it's ships like ours which are ballasting.
Let's open up some questions. Mike?
Just along those lines. Yeah, just along those lines. How much leeway do you have right now within the working cap facilities associated with TI if the number of vessels going in is going up pretty significantly and the outlay associated with bunkers is poised to continue going higher? How much room do you have, and when does that renew?
It renews at the end of 2018. We've increased the size with the working cap facility with the introduction of the new ships, and obviously, I say obviously, you know, our belief is that you're going to see an increase in bunker prices, and then we'll be able to increase the working capital requirement then as well.
You just missed one step there because freight goes up in the meantime.
Yeah.
Sure, but just in terms of headroom.
I think we're sort of 60, 65-ish on a 75 facility.
Yeah. Were there some more questions?
Thanks. Deutsche Bank. Quick question, a couple questions on the IMO, if I could. First is, you talked about the displaced residual heavy fuel oil. You know, by our estimate, there's like 1 million barrels per day that can't be, you know, blended down to make compliant fuel. There are some speculation that, irrespective of price, that could actually be stored on old VLCCs. I was wondering if you could talk about the potential for that. Related to that, you didn't really mention the pull on, you know, well, you kind of did in terms of the refining utilization and the pull on crude. Potentially that could drive contango in the oil markets, which at the end of this year, I'm wondering when you could see that in the futures market, so that maybe floating storage from an economic perspective, kind of like what it did a few years ago, albeit for a short amount of time. And then last point, if I could, on the slow steaming comment. I understand the slow steaming comment in a high sulfur sort of IMO, post-IMO 2020 world, but when the values of the cargoes are so high in product and crude tankers, what are the economics of slow steaming when fuel prices are high, given that dynamic? Thank you.
Well, I think the first two were easy, yes and yes. And the last one was, yes, if you get a completely crushed, let's say there's almost a disposal cost price for high sulfur fuel oil, I think that there's energy value in it. It is usable and processable. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if you saw that kind of dumping, that there would be, eyes would be perking up of people like a Valero or one of the people that has a good complex refinery system to say, let's get some ships and let's store this stuff, we'll bring it on when we need to, because they'll make money from it. So it's always, I mean, this is so easy, this business, because it is just about running the calculations and seeing where the margins are. So I think that, you know, they can do that calculation, that can happen. Contango, I mean, it's the oil market, I understand, is generally in backwardation as a price structure. But if we say that we think that there's going to be a surge in refining runs as a result of this fuel oil spec change, where's the capacity coming from? Because there isn't that much capacity in the world, and hopefully some people in the offshore industry would benefit from that. And your last point, which I've now forgotten.
Sorry.
The slow steaming, yeah, no. So look, the slow steaming in laden condition, forget it. I mean, that'll be a question for the charterer. It's only for us in the positioning of the ships on the ballast voyages.
Can I just come in on that?
Yeah.
Because I think that's an interesting point, because obviously we would, as an ownership, we would make the greater savings if we could actually reduce the speed in our laden condition. We look at it a lot of times, and how you do the calculation. But again, to come back to my view about the industrialization of our model, we find absolute total, well, I say total, almost total resistance from our charterers in being able to reduce our laden speeds. Because at the end of the day, what they're dealing with is a slate of ships arriving at a certain time. So if everybody was to be able to change the speed to a lower speed, I think we could deal with that. What they can't deal with is some arriving here, some arriving there, some arriving there. So we find it extremely difficult and meet absolute resistance at the moment of being able to change our laden speeds down. But again, I think it goes to my view of how it's being looked. They find it very difficult to deal with something slightly out of the ordinary.
Thank you.
Back to production. Do you guys have a view on what OPEC's going to do?
He could tell you, but then he'd have to shoot.
Yes, that's right.
No, look, I can tell you something that isn't confidential or related to a customer. It's just that the Saudis, as early as January of this year, were back out talking to people in the US about selling oil again. Clearly, they wanted to hit the US in order to bring down the best observed inventories in the world. So, but they were back out talking in January. I think they're back out selling now, so more cargo is actually coming in. And I think that on the shipping side, there are rumblings that ships are going to get moved into the Atlantic as a result of supplying that need.
I want to elaborate on the positioning of the TI pool. Obviously, TI pool received a big boost in terms of size, going towards 65 vessels. But what about positioning towards smaller independent players? Because obviously, as a flip side, it will more than ever have a Euronav stamp.
I think that it's been interesting in the last few weeks, and even before the consummation, that we have been approached by a number of outlying owners to come into the TI pool. We took a Hong Kong owner a couple of months ago. Vitol, for example, have a ship in the pool. We have discussions with a number at the moment. Our position about it is quite simple, is that, if and I think, again, it's important from how we sell, in what we sell. If the owner is going to complement what we already sell in the type of ship that we have, the ethos of the company, in coming into the pool, we're very much wanting to accommodate that. But again, it's important that you have people who sit next to each other who have a similar view, similar ethos on how we view our customers, how we deal with them. So that's important.
I think, Jonathan, there's also, we earlier in the year, we actively added some members with good quality older tonnage, but found that quite a struggle. The timing of it couldn't have been worse, of course.
Yeah. But that was the older ships, not the people who joined.
Not the people who joined.
What do you think about all the new orders?
Let's hope that a fool and his money are soon parted, because I suppose the ambition that I would have is that people wouldn't speculatively order, but we know why they do speculatively order. They speculatively order because they're hugely attracted by the leverage that they can get from shipyard. I think that if, in the good old days of German banking through KGs, you might have got 110% of a second-hand resale vessel. I never thought I'd be saying this, by the way. And therefore, you'd have got the leverage that would have made your bet exciting for the people who like that kind of life. So maybe we would have had more resale if we had had more free money in banking. But the banking businesses have got their houses in order, and there's less available leverage. So if you want to get a huge leverage bet, you go and order a new building because you get 90% leverage. I mean, if you looked at the story that we're hearing on Hunter, for instance, was that essentially the book of investors was brought to the CEO of is he CEO? Mr. Freddie, anyway, was brought to him by the broker, saying these people want to get a play on. Will you be the bell cow that leads them in? And the answer was yes. But is he still holding the position or has he flipped it? You don't know. But it's the fuel oil spread was the play, was the sort of tagline to get people in. But the gamble was the same old gamble, leverage. Now, that means that the ship does not have a life of 25 years or 20 years. The play has a lifetime between the date of the signing the contract and the date at which you can no longer afford to either take delivery or to fund the installments. So that's the burn time on the option, and you're playing the freight market with that leverage on that option period. And as long as the shipyards are prepared to finance the construction of ships, we're going to have a new building order book. And I think we just stop moaning about it, accept it as a fact of life. And when they deliver the ships or they come close to it, let's sweat them on price. Let's make sure that they don't get the return that they wanted. Metrostar did it twice very successfully. But in the last order of VLCCs, we were very pleased to take them off them and leave them turned tail between legs, heading off back to the beach thinking, well, that wasn't a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. Let's do it again. Let's sweat them.
Sorry, three quick questions back on IMO again. The first one is pretty simple. Thanks for the great presentation. The first one is pretty simple, which is you went through the presentation, but you didn't actually talk about what you think your strategy might actually be, i.e. are you going to outfit everything with scrubbers, or what are you actually going to do? And if you do go the scrubber route, can you just talk about the capital expenditure involved across the fleet and how you sort of think about financing that? So why don't I wait till you answer that, and then I'll ask you two sort of follow-ons.
Depending on how I answer. Look, I think one of the things that we're trying to ban from conversations around this is the word strategy. Because there is no strategy. And I don't mean there's no strategy at Euronav. I just don't think that this is a strategy issue. This is a question of, do you remember that scene in Dirty Harry where Clint Eastwood stands over one of the villains on the ground and says, I can't remember whether I've got 5 bullets in the gun or whether I put 4 in or something, and do you feel lucky, punk? I mean, that's basically where we stand on the IMO story today, that everybody's looking at it and saying, how regretful am I going to be, and how lucky do I think I'm going to be? Will the fuel oil spread hold for me? Will I have it on long enough? Will it not do enough collateral damage or destruction along its way? Do I feel lucky? Can I afford it? Can I afford to do it, and can I afford not to do it? So I don't really think I'd call it a strategy. I'd call it opportunistic. Can Euronav put scrubbers on 75 ships in the time available? We probably, well, let's be bold and say that we could. But if we did that, it would be hugely destructive of earnings, because you'd be queuing ships up at yards all over the place, dropping out $1 million at least a month of earnings, in the hope that when you got your scrubber on board afterwards, the market will have picked up or that something would have happened. So I kind of don't think that the spread risk at the moment and the chances that we're being asked to take look like something that would be anywhere sensible to do on a whole fleet basis. So then you'd be looking to say, well, is it a partial fleet solution or is it occasional ships? Some crazy guy was writing in one of the analyst reports saying that it makes sense to do it on every ship in your fleet that's under 5 years of age. I would say no. Those are the ships that don't need a scrubber, right? If you've got a choice, then the ships you need to put a scrubber on are the ones that are 10 years old. Why? Because they still burn 100 tons a day. Euronav's already taken its strategic step in the merger with Generate. The big unspoken win of this merger for Euronav is that it's dropped the unit day fuel consumption bill of our whole fleet. Because the ships that we bought are under 2 years of average age, burning 25 tons less fuel a day. We've already put ourselves into the top league of low consumers of bunkers as a result of this. Will we take some add-ons of a few more ships? As you can tell, we're a little bit in an agony or a dilemma of wanting to know whether we're going to be regretful or happy, and we're trying to work through that at the moment.
So what do you do post-2020 with ships that don't have scrubbers? You're just playing the fuel oil spread, right? I mean, that's
No.
pretty dangerous game.
No. Post-2020, like 95% of the ocean-going fleet, so 95% of every ship that's on the water is going to burn compliant fuels. And we're going to pass that on to the customer. Now, can you opportunistically make a few extra dollars by putting a scrubber on board and playing the collapsed bunker oil price? That's the question. And the question is, do you feel lucky, punk?
Got you. All right. So on that lucky punk question, can you talk a little bit about
being a lucky punk?
How you think about what percent of the fleet sort of comes out? Because it just doesn't make sense to play that game.
Well, honestly, you can't make other people's decisions for them. We heard very loud and clear from John Angelo Kousis in Posidonia that he was going to do his whole fleet, apart from the LNG ships. We hear through the grapevine that that's not what's happening at Maran, that they are definitely putting some scrubbers on board, but it's not a wholesale, let's go out and get 110 or something.
Gotcha. And then sort of very last one, again, back on this IMO thing. What percent of the market do you think, the regulations for sure are there, post-2020, but what percent of the market do you think will still, quote unquote, agree to, non-compliant fuel? I.e. you go from, I don't know, someplace in West Africa to someplace in India, and you just keep doing that over and over again.
I think honestly, I don't think that we'll see much of that in the tanker world. I would think that that's much more likely to be seen in the less regulated areas where people simply say, oh, I couldn't care less. I'm going to, as you say, I'm going to an unregulated port, from an unregulated port, probably with a cargo of cement or, or of, so I think in that handy Panamax size of the dry cargo market or in the coastal markets, you might find it going on.